when we do Bible study, we look at the Bible, is just take a look at a character, a person, and kind of develop that person kind of throughout that life. And so we're looking at the prophet Elisha, one of my favorite prophets. And I missed a couple of messages, so I'm kind of circling back to it. But Elisha's one of my favorite prophets. He's known for his boldness. So he never seems to, he always has this expectation that God is going to do something great. Anybody ever just wish in your heart that you just had 100% of the time that sort of expectation of something great? So that's why it's fun. It's good to kind of analyze it, to look at it, because that's the kind of faith that I want to have. The kind of faith that always anticipates that God's going to do something great. In fact, there's only one little time that he seemed to waver, and it was very early in his, when Elijah, who was his mentor and called him into ministry, he just said, "Follow me." And Elisha says, "Well, all right, let me go say goodbye to my parents." And Elijah basically goes, "What have I done to you?" And it's sort of like, "What? You don't even know what I'm offering you." And so then he gets it. He goes, "This is a big call from God." And so he goes home and he burns all of his plowing equipment. He kills 24 of his oxes and has this huge party and feeds the village. That would be like today would be millions and millions of dollars of farming equipment. Basically, he burned all of his bridges. He said, "I'm never going back to farming again." So that was the only little time that you saw him maybe express a little bit of doubt. All the rest of it, he's just this person of great courage. He speaks with the authority of God. And so somebody that I really admire. Now, this particular story is one that probably we all know if we grew up in church. But he has this prophetic cohort, this prophetic company, and they're students and they're teachers and they're learning, and so he's got this prophetic company. And one of his cohorts, one of his colleagues, dies, and he's not able to pay his creditors. So the man's widow comes to Elisha asking for help. She says, I can't pay the creditor, and he's coming now to make my sons slaves, which would be part of the Mosaic law. If somebody couldn't be, usually slavery, if you went into slavery, it was because you owed a debt or you were poor. There was something like that. So it was part of the way that they did that. Sort of like in some cultures we would do debtor's prison. But this is what's happening. The boys are going to be made slaves. So he says, "Well, what can I do for you?" He says, "What do you have? What do you have in your house?" She says, I don't have anything. I have a jar of olive oil." Now, olive oil in that culture would be something pretty significant. Olive oil was used as we use it for cooking, but it was also used for medicinal purposes. It had value, but that's all she had. It wasn't worth very much. She just had this jar of olive oil. So he says, "Go into your neighborhood, go to all your neighbors, and ask for jars, empty jars." And he says, "Don't ask for just a few. Ask for a lot of them." So she does that. Her and her boys, they go out and they ask for jars. She gathers all these jars, and then she brings them back into her house. And he says, "Okay, so I go into your house, close the door, and take the olive oil that you have and begin pouring it into these jars." So she begins this, and these are pretty sizable buckets. She begins pouring these jars of oil into the next jar and then the next one, and it's divinely being multiplied, and she begins filling up all these jars until finally she looks over to her son and says, "Hand me another jar." And he goes, "That's all that's left." And then as soon as all of the jars are filled, the oil stops flowing. And she goes to Elisha, and she's obviously, sometimes when the Bible tells these stories, it doesn't give us a lot of the emotion and and the kind of what's going on behind the scenes. But clearly, she would be very excited about this. And she goes to Elisha and basically says, "Hey, this is what happened." And Elisha says, "Well, go sell the olive oil, sell all the olive oil, pay for your debts, and then live off the rest of it." So it gives you an idea of how much oil she had made. Now, as you know, if you've been around here, around me for a little bit, one of the ways that I like to experience Scripture, and a really helpful way, if you kind of think to yourself, now how do I make the Bible come alive as I read it, And I hope you have some kind of reading plan. Reading it every day is very, very helpful. Have a devotion plan. Have something that you're just reading through. Take a book and just read it through just a few minutes every morning or in the evening before you go to bed. That's a really helpful habit to have. And what I try to do is when I read, I try to put myself in the story and say, like, how would I respond? How would I think? What would be going through my heart and my mind? So I think of this, and I've thought a lot about this poor widow, a lot down through the years as I've read this story. And some of my reflection on it is, what would I be like if it were my spouse that had just died and had left me with a large debt that I couldn't pay? Well, obviously, I'd be grieving, right? There'd be a lot of grief. It can be exhausting if you've ever had to bury somebody that you love. It's a really exhausting process. If you have a lot of debt, you're fearful, right? You're fearful, I can't pay the debt. They're going to take my house, or they're going to take my kids if you live in that culture. So you're fearful. But you also might be a little anxious about going and asking your neighbors. I know what it's like to have to ask for help. We've had some need in our family, and we had to ask, and that's not a very good place or a very comfortable place to be, isn't it? That's one of the reasons that we like to, whenever we can help people, we do it so that if we ever have to ask for help, we can, we have the custom of giving. So generosity is giving and receiving, and so we like to give as much as we can, whenever we can, so that if we need to ask for help, people will know that we're generous and we really do need help. So she might be thinking to herself, man, I don't want to go ask my neighbors for this. She might also be looked on as, in a diminished way. There might be neighbors that say, well, you should have paid your debts, right? I wonder how many of us would say that today if somebody came and asked for some help, for some money, and you go, well, I shouldn't have got that credit card all hocked up now. So, we do. We tend to think that way, right? And she might have thought to herself, man, I just don't know if they're going to really honor this or see this in the light of what I'm doing. But it says that her husband revered God. So I suspect probably people in the community would know. But maybe they look down on her because she's poor. That happens a lot too. A lot of times culture looks down on other people because they're poor and she's got her hand out. So certainly not a place I don't think that she wants to be. I don't think anybody really wants to be in that place where you have to kind of go through all of that. But then I even go like a little bit deeper, and I go, well, all right, this prophet Elisha, he says to go get empty jars. What am I going to do with an empty jar? It'd be like going around saying, hey, you got a bucket or something I can, what? But then she would know Elisha. She would have seen all of the miracles that he'd done up until this point. And so maybe she's like, all right, I'll just go do the best I can. But if she's like me, and maybe this is a task she didn't really want to do, and she goes and she does it, how many would I get? How many doors would I knock on asking for these empty jars? Because he said, don't get just a few. Would I get my 3 or 4 and go, that Elisha's crazy. This is enough. I don't want to do this anymore. Would I keep at it? Would I keep gathering more and more jars? And would I stay with it even though I didn't want to, even though I was tired, even though I was fearful, even though maybe my neighbors didn't look at me in a very positive light? Right? There's all kind, or maybe I'm sad. Maybe I just need to grieve alone. But I have to do this because my sons might lose their freedom. And how many would I get? So I think about, I reflected on that because, this is more relevant to our life than I think sometimes we think about. Sometimes we look at these miracles and we sort of kind of just tuck them away into something that God used to do, and maybe doesn't quite do it so much anymore, and maybe this is more like a fairy tale. Is this really? But there's a real relevance in our life that is profound. Because what this widow is doing is she's preparing herself to be blessed by God. And I want you to reflect on that. The Bible promises blessings. But are we preparing ourselves to receive all that God has for us? Or are we just kind of hoping that something shows up? I imagine sometimes there are times in my life with God when God is right there with a big surplus of oil and goes, well, Jim, that'll all be yours, but you don't have any jars. And I wonder if in God's heavenly plan and in God's heavenly design, how much I miss out on the blessing of God because I have not prepared myself for it. I haven't gathered enough jars. How do we gather jars to receive God's blessing? This isn't a complete list. But I think there's things that we need to do in our lives, in our heart, to make us open to the blessings of God. I think we need to overcome bitterness. I think it's really hard for God to bless bitter people. I do. I think we need to be forgiving. I don't know that God blesses unforgiving people. That's not my place to say who God blesses and who doesn't bless. But as I've looked around, I don't think so. And we have to, even before all that, we have to understand what blessing is and what it's not. I cannot tell you how many times. I have one conversation in my mind that's so vivid, where I'm with this guy and, he made a lot of money, and I go, how are things going? He goes, God's really blessed me. Because he made a lot of money. And he's a friend of mine, so I can get away with this and say it. I go, no, he hasn't. You're in 10 different lawsuits. Your family's falling apart. You got all kinds of bad habits. You're miserable. You're angry. You're the most unhappy person I know. And you know that blessed means happy, content? So we need to get rid of that idea. When people say, well, God's really blessed me, that usually means I made a lot of money. And I know some of the most miserable people on earth have a lot of money because their possessions hold them. They don't hold their possessions. And some of the most blessed people I know are people who are poor. So we have to get that part of it straight before we can even understand anything about God's blessing, before we can start creating a place for God to bless us. So we got to get rid of bitterness. We got to get rid of unforgiveness. We got to get rid of anger. I'm so angry, but God's going to bless me and make me happy. I'm still not happy. Is that a blessing? I don't think so. I think we need to get rid of a lot of the worldly things that tend to distract us. And there's a lot of them. Put some of those things aside. Walk closer with Jesus. Put better habits in our life. I think sometimes most of life is just dying with more good habits than bad ones. That's not a bad goal. Hopefully die with no bad habits, but we're all probably going to have a few. The reason that I know that God's plan for us is to bless us is because the scripture is full of the promise of blessing. And it's really very, very simple. To be blessed, you have to be a blessing. I want to pull up this passage from Luke. This is from the Sermon on the Plain, not the plain. There's a Sermon on the Mountain and there's a Sermon on the Plain, a flat spot there weren't any plains at the time of Jesus. So this is the Sermon on the Plain or on the field. And it's very much like the Sermon on the Mount. There's a lot to it, but this is just one section of it. And it says, give, and it will be given to you. So keep this idea of God giving, of God blessing, of God pouring out his Spirit on his people. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Now, the reason I'm kind of making this connection is because the mandate was to give, and you're going to get it back. For this widow, she had to go get something, right? She didn't have anything. But what she was doing was she was collecting jars to be able to handle God's blessing. to be able to receive the fullness of God's blessing, and God, the prophet said, don't gather just a few. So keep this thought in mind of giving. And we're not talking about money. We're talking about giving of ourselves so that we can create a container to receive the blessings of God. And it's actually a way, way more simple than I think, or that we think. Imagine I've got some containers, and they're whatever I can put in them. So I have things that I can give away. All right? And I can come to people and I can say, well, here's a little bit of kindness. Okay? A little bit of kindness, even if maybe I don't feel like I want to give away a little bit of kindness. Or I can say, here's a little bit of time. You know, the gift of time is a pretty big deal, right? If you give somebody your time, people sometimes are more cautious with their time than they are even with their money. Time is, how many of y'all, anybody working too much and got, anybody? Yeah, all right, most of us. To have a little bit of time and you give it to somebody, that's valuable, right? What about a little forgiveness? So I give out a little bit of forgiveness. That's a pretty big deal. What about just a smile on a Sunday morning and a handshake? How's things going? Just a little good cheer. You ever been around that person that just makes you feel so good? Every time they're in the room, they just light up the room and they make you feel so good. They ask you about it and you go, I love that person, right? Sometimes a kind, gentle word at the right time happens a lot. Maybe it's just some service. I think of Steve here because Steve's plays bass with us just about every week. A little service. You're giving your time to serve the people of God. So many things we could say. What about a little bit of justice and mercy that I extend to somebody or to a group of people, or I help my community. I help people that need it. I want to make sure that they're treated well and treated with kindness. What about hospitality? I kind of give a part of my life over to people so that they can experience some fellowship and some love. Maybe it's lonely people that don't often get to interact with other people. What if it's a little bit of mentoring? I talk to a lot of young people that say, I want to do something with my life. I want to be a business owner. I want to be an academic. I want to be a musician. And I love, love, love meeting with young people and dreaming their life with them. What about money? Mackenzie's going to give me some money someday. Yeah, girl. What about money? Well, okay, that's certainly part of it. Sometimes people have needs. Sometimes we have to support one another, right? I think you get where this is going. So now what I've done, and there's so many examples. Think about all the examples of all the things that we could be doing. I send something out. I give something away. And read that again. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, more than you will ever be able to consume or use. You'll have so much it'll be spilling into your lap, like trying to eat a McDonald's Big Mac cheeseburger when you're driving down the road. The little lettuce is going to be all over your lap, right? That's what it's going to be like. So much. But the Bible says if we give a little, you're just going to get a little. But if I give generously, all of a sudden, I can't remember the order, all of a sudden I get a little bit of kindness back. Only more than I gave because it's pressed, falling over the top, right? I get a little bit of somebody, I gave a little bit of advice out, got some mentoring. Now I've got some wisdom in my life. If I give a little kindness, I got more kindness, more than I can ever use. If I give a little, whatever it was, I can't remember. Time. If I gave time, all of a sudden I've got time in my life. God's multiplying it. I'm going from blessing to blessing to blessing. And my goal is to put so many out that all of the things that's coming back in my life, I get it multiplied over and over. Justice, kindness, love, forgiveness. All of the things that God promises me. But if I only put one or two of these out, maybe somebody will pick that up. That's not how it works. I want a bunch of them out. I want a bunch of them until I can't even hold them. I've got so many. I got so much love. I got so much generosity. I got so much money. I got so much time. I got so much everything in my life that it's just falling out. And I got more to give. And I got more to love. And I got more people to encourage. And I got more good things to do for people so that we can be a blessing to people. You know who aren't blessings to people? People who are bitter, people that are angry, people that lack forgiveness, people that live with resentment in their heart, people that haven't dealt with some of the challenges and the pains in their life, and that negative recording just keeps playing over and over and over and over again. You get rid of that stuff. And then you start giving yourself away little by little by little. And you will have more Jesus than you will ever know what to do with. That's when we become a people of abundance. That's when we become people of the abundance and the blessings of Jesus, so that others can have it too. Y'all dig? We're going to do a little bit of music.